ladies and gentlemen, welcoming to the Ray Carr Show, Bill Pursell. Bill, American composer, session pianist, and just a music extraordinary person that just knows more about the music industry than anybody I know. Bill, welcome.
Well, good evening, Ray, and happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving to you, sir. And for our audience that does not know your background, I'll let you just do a brief expose of some of the wonderful things that you've accomplished in the last 50 years.
In the last 50 years?
Yeah.
Well, there have been a number of different things. I've sort of worked on both sides of the fence, as I mentioned to you the last time we talked, both in the classical and in the commercial area. And my background, actually, I started off to be a concert pianist. I was born in California, in Oakland, and raised in Tulare, and studied concert piano at Berkeley with a concert coach by the name of Elizabeth Simpson, who used to be a pupil of Arthur Schnabel. And then from there, I got a composition scholarship to the Peabody Conservatory of Music in Baltimore. And while I was there studying with Nicholas Nabokov and other people in theory, Madame Langy, Renee Langy-McKell, who, by the way, used to teach at Curtis and I think taught Leonard Bernstein. But at that particular time, I was 18, and I was, studying composition and concert piano with him. The concert piano studies were with a marvelous teacher named Alexander Shalevsky from Russia, obviously. And then I went into the service at that time. This was back in World War II. And the draft was coming by, so I decided to enlist, and I eventually ended up in the Air Force Orchestra in Washington, D.C., writing for their radio shows. And I was about 19 at the time, and I had a 65-piece orchestra that I was lucky to have to write for. And I would say probably a good deal of my orchestral background was built on the time that I spent in Washington with that orchestra. I finally extended my enlistment to 3 years, and I got out in 1949. And then from there, I went to the Eastman School of Music in Rochester, New York, and studied with Dr. Howard Hansen and some other people. And eventually I got my bachelor's and my master's and my doctoral degree from there. By the way, the doctoral degree, I finished everything for it in 1956, except 2 orals and a thesis. But by that time, I was going on the road with an R&B group called the Jerry J Trio just to make some money. And so I sort of parked the degree for that particular time, thinking I'll get back to it. But when I came here to Nashville, I thought, well, there it goes. I'm probably never going to finish it, and so on and so forth. So let's forward up to about 1990, when I was in California. I belonged to a club out there called the Bohemian Club, and during that particular time, the director of the Eastman School of Music, Bob Freeman, happened to come around. And we got to know each other, and he said, well, why don't you finish your doctoral degree? And I said, good Lord, after all this period of time, I can't imagine that you'd be serious. And he said, well, do you have a list of your hours? And I said, certainly. I have them at Belmont, where I was teaching at the time. And so he said, well, send them to us. And so I did. And they got back with me and said, well, we're not going to give this to you. You're going to have to work for it, but we'll count your courses. But then you're going to have to write a thesis, pass a written examination, and give a concert up there. So I went through all of that, did it, and finished it in 1995, and I was one click away from 70 when I did that.
Wow.
And so that's it. And I've been there ever since, and I'm now getting ready to retire from Belmont. And I found out the other day that they voted me in an emeritus, which I was absolutely shell-shocked over. I had not even thought about it.
It's amazing.
So there it is. Next June or May the 31st in 2017, I'll be out as a retired composer of composition emeritus, and that'll be it. That's it for me. And then I probably will go back and record again and start doing all kinds of other things. While I was there, I wrote 2 years ago an opera with Fred Birch. I don't know if you remember that name, but he wrote PT 109 with Mary John Wilkins back in 1961.
Yeah.
And so Fred and I worked on this thing. It is probably the first bluegrass opera that's ever been written. And it consists of a bluegrass group, trained voices, and a string octet with a percussionist, a harpsichord, and the whole thing. So it's sort of a combination of Puccini and bluegrass. And we did the thing a year ago as a kind of a light opera type of production at Belmont, and it was okay, but I didn't get my bluegrass group. But when I retire, possibly we can put this thing on, later on. Oh. And that about sums it up, I think.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'd like to talk a little bit about, I was listening to Our Winter Love, 1963 hit that you had, and for Columbia Records, and it's such a beautiful melody, and it still resonates with me today.
Well, thank you. You want the story about that?
I'd love to hear the story about that.
Well, it's like everything else. These things happen by chance sometimes, and it ends up being entirely different from what it was originally intended to be. But Grady Martin, who was the leader of our sessions for Columbia Records, who I was signed at that time with Columbia Records, and he came over and he said, "Listen, Bill, I found this 78 demo that was sent to me by Johnny Cowell in Canada, and it's a trumpet solo, but it's one afternoon I put it on at 45 RPM instead of 78, and it came out sounding this way with a lot of echo on it, and they had to happen to have a piano. I'm going to turn around to the piano right now and play it very fast. It was the top of it. I'm going to put this on a speakerphone. Hold on.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, can you hear me?
Perfectly.
All right, so I turned it this way. And so forth. And went into the melody. I thought it was a gimmick at the time, so I used that and repeated the first 8 bars over and over again and threw the release out. And that's basically what I did, and that's the record. First 8 bars repeated over and over again. Bill Justice worked with me at the time on it. You remember Jeff Bell, who recorded Raunchy. And am I okay with you on sound here?
You're perfectly. Yeah, you're fine.
Well, let me just put this off again. Okay, here I am. Okay, so I said to Bill, "Look, I'm an arranger. You're an arranger, but I'm the soloist in this case. This is my first album out for Columbia, so why don't I just tell you what I want, and we'll both be arrangers, and I'll be the soloist, and that's how we'll do it." So we went ahead and cut it as Long Island Sound. That was the name of the thing. And when it was sent to New York, 2 people, Mort Hoffman and Bob Thompson, got interested. They were PR men up there at that time. Bob ended up being a lawyer, came back down here to Nashville and practiced law until he finally passed on. But they worked themselves up about the record, and finally they came up with this new name called Our Winter Love. And you know something, Ray, when you listen to this darn thing, and I think I mentioned it before last week, I said when you listen to it, there is a kind of a chilly winter sound to the thing.
Yeah.
Have you noticed that?
It does. It feels very January to me.
Well, that's exactly right. And so there's a good argument going on here about somehow people's instincts that somehow maybe rule the way a record is eventually released. That has nothing to do with the artist or the recording or the arrangement or anything else. This is the type of thing that happens in commercial music. And so that's the way it went out. It went out as Our Winter Love. And all these years, when you pull up YouTube, you'll see all these different people who have listened to it. And it means something to them. And I think I mentioned to you last time we talked that it's a very interesting phenomenon. But then when you cut a record, it's your record, but once you release it, it's not your record anymore. It belongs to everybody.
Right. What did you learn most about, the record business after that record came out? Did anything dawn on you like, the music industry is more in depth than I thought, or things are a little more complicated?
Well, it's very interesting that you would ask me that question, because I was thinking recently about something that Charlie McCoy, you know the name, Charlie McCoy and I were talking about years and years ago. And that is the sort of feeling that you get in a studio when a record is being cut, when it's on its way to being a hit. It's very interesting. I don't know if I've recorded in Los Angeles and London and Nashville and in Chicago and all these places, but I think that maybe it has to do with something about the material and the fact that it was cut here in Nashville. But supposing you had to do something and you had to pick up some papers and then you walked in the back door of a studio while the session was going on and something is being cut. And you notice immediately that there is a tremendous stillness over the entire studio, even though everybody is playing and the vocalist is singing through the microphone and the board, of course, is picking her up and doing things with her voice. And you feel at that point that you're witnessing the beginning of a hit record in progress.
Huh.
Yeah.
Wow.
From the stillness that's in there. It's kind of a musical devotion, I would call it, to the material that is going into those microphones.
It's kind of eerie, isn't it?
Well, it's very interesting to me. I've been on several sessions. Well, I shouldn't say several hundreds, but not in other places, not in Los Angeles or, maybe in Los Angeles one time when I was recording with my daughter out there and we were doing an album.
Laura, right?
And Laura Pursell. And when we recorded here at the Tracking Room, Laura's wonderful to work with. I'll say this right now, she's the boss. She tells me what to do. But she's very, very sensitive about what she does and what she wants to do and what is required and what she's set up in her own mind that she wants to accomplish. And I had the same feeling when I was recording with Patsy Cline especially. Patsy wasn't the easiest artist to work with, especially with Owen Bradley, because she had certain ideas about the kinds of songs she wanted to sing. But Owen would say to her, "Now, Patsy, just go ahead and just record the song because Bill McElhenney has worked all afternoon on the strings. Let's just go ahead and do it." And she'd say, "Oh, okay, Owen." And then the magic would start. And there it is.
Did you realize that she was one of the greatest country singers of all time?
No doubt. There was no doubt in my mind. The very interesting part in my mind at the very end, after she cracked, or 2 weeks before she cracked up, when we were in the studio cutting Sweet Dreams, for instance. Wow. And I was playing vibes on that particular session. And of course, here comes the complaint again, and then she cut it, and then she lost her life in this crack up, and then we went through the funeral and all that sort of thing. And it was very depressing. And then the record came out. And Ray, when the record came out, the echo on her voice was almost spooky. It was almost as if she was singing Beyond the Grave,
Yeah, that was the last song she recorded, right?
That's right. And some of the last songs that she recorded, but not a particular song it was. And I mentioned to Selby when I ran into him, I said, Selby, I've got the strangest reaction to that solo, the quality of the performance on her voice. And he said, yes, I've been getting that from a lot of people. And I said, well, what did you do? He said, well, I probably put a little more echo onto it and reverb and so forth. And I said, but that's not all. There's just something there when you listen to it. Even today, Ray, when I listen to it, I get the same impression of that solo after the accident, after she'd gone.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, she was taken away way too soon, March 5th, 1963, at the age of 30. It's hard to believe that she's been gone this many years.
But when you play the record, she's here.
That's correct. I completely agree with you. I listen to Sweet Dreams. I've been playing it for a long time, and it sounds as fresh as it was made yesterday.
Yeah, very definitely. And I played vibes on the session, and I noticed that when Selby mixed it, Floyd was playing piano, and Grady was playing guitar. He led the session. And I noticed that Selby turned up the vibes. The vibes have a little device underneath the bars that makes the sound shimmer a little bit, as you know. And he turned that up a little bit on the mix down. And when you listen to it, you'll probably be aware of this going on underneath the sound, which gives it even more of that feeling of something somewhere else, you know.
Yeah.
And that's it. And so, you know, and I'm writing a whole series of different things about things that happened during those days. I've written one about Marty Robbins and the first time that the fuzz sound was by accident was discovered, you know.
You know, Bill, let's talk about that a little bit, the fuzz sound with Marty Robbins. How did it all begin?
Well, we were on a session. At the time, it was a thing called "Don't Worry." I remember that was the record, and I had come in a little late, and when I came in, I went directly to the piano to sit down and start, you know, getting my stuff together. But meanwhile, evidently something had happened, and Marty, and well, actually, Marty was involved in this whole thing, but Grady had evidently plugged in, and this distortion had come out, and he was talking to Selby in the booth and saying, Selby, what the hell is going on here? And Selby said, I know, we're looking for it right now, and we can't, it may be in the new stereo board, we don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, but finally, after going back and forth in this whole thing, he said, well, never mind, just leave it alone. I'll kick it in with my guitar, you know. So I had no idea this was going to happen. I had missed all of this. But I do remember seeing another sound engineer, Glenn Snoddy, moving around the room, pulling out and replacing chords, you know, in part of the studio. So after we had worked out this arrangement with Marty, to our satisfaction, we got down to the business with Don Law, the producer, saying over the studio speaker, okay, Marty, take one. And we began to record. And, you know, at that particular time, everybody was playing and was going on and so forth. And so finally, when we finished the final cadence before Grady's instrumental break, then this never heard before outer space sound, grinding bass sound, suddenly filled up the entire studio from Grady's amplifier, totally unheard of and unknown up to that point. I almost fell out of my chair. And I looked up to the front of the studio to find Marty, who was doing some kind of a wild Apache dance up there near the microphone. But to this day, I have no idea if it was his reaction to the new sound or if he just left the planet, you know, for a while.
Wow. I mean that's earth-shattering.
Well, anyway, so he had heard it, but his reaction I never found out. But because of Grady's peculiar instincts, this actually went on to become one of the big records, huge record sales at that particular time. And I feel it was partly because of this fuzz effect. And by the way, Ray, I used that fuzz effect on my Winter Love record too, on the second chorus.
Yes, I noticed that. That's
You know, that was Bill's idea, Bill Justice. But anyway, so we went ahead and did that. But what it comes down to is that I don't believe there is one rock artist in the world today that doesn't use this distortion in concerts.
Right.
And what Glenn Snoddy did was that he took apart a console to figure out how to create this distortion, and then he built the first, what they call distortion pedal, to be put inside of a small so-called fuzz box with a button to distort the sound. And that's basically what they use today. So people like Keith Richards and especially Jimi Hendrix, who, as you know, experimented so famously most of his career with this different uses of the distorted guitar effects, obviously would owe much, you know, to this unplanned thing that happened one afternoon in 1961. End of story.
That's a great story. And tell me some more. I mean, there's got to be some other people. You've worked with Bill Justice. You've worked with, I'm sure, Johnny Cash and many others. And is there any like inside stories that we don't know that you'd like to tell now?
Well, John was probably one of the most oriented, straight-ahead type of people you can imagine when he came into that studio, because he knew exactly what he was in there for. I never saw him ever get angry. He was always, even in the early days when he was taking all those amphetamines, and he was down to 145 pounds, which, by the way, I found out from Cindy Cash, one of his daughters, just this last year when I happened to be flying to California in first class, and there she was sitting next to me. We got to talking, and I said, you know, I was on your father's records.
Wow.
And she said, no kidding. And she told me that at the time we cut Ring of Fire.
1963.
That's right. And when I was on the piano, and I did my little Ray Charles Lake on it. They let me do that. And I thought it fit the material at the time. But she said he was about 145 pounds at that point. And this record, you know, with the two trumpets played by Carl Garvin and Bill McElhaney, who were musicians in Nashville at that time. They're both gone now.
Right.
But that's da 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 da. You know, there they were sitting over by the wall, and Selby had set up the microphone for them, and it became huge.
It was an incredible song, and it was so innovative because the horns were something you never expected to be in a song like that.
Well, there's a story about that too. Actually, the song was written by June Carter and Merrill Kilgore. And Bob Moore, who I mentioned, who plays bass, or played bass, he still does, had put out a record called Mexico for Monument Records. And he had used two trumpets on that. And evidently, John went to him and said, listen, I've got this property I'm going to do. I mean, it's Ring of Fire, and I want to know if it's okay with you if I use two trumpets on it. And he said, sure, why not? Go ahead, you know. And that's how that's happened.
Oh.
It was planned, but he went ahead and got permission from Bob Moore, and it's sort of the way that records are put together. You know, one piece goes in here and another piece goes in there, and you finally end up with a record, and then you have to go back and figure out just what all those pieces were, you know.
Right, exactly.
Which is what I'm trying to do with all of these things that I'm writing about now.
When you're finished, Bill, I'd like to know if you can come back and maybe just, you know, give an even further explanation of the music industry in your coming from your eyes.
Well, I would love to do that. So it's so far back right now. The industry today is so different from what we had in those days. And I know that sounds like an old timer talking, but the approach is different now. Good Lord, the technical facilities are so much more superior today with what we work with, you know, the computers. You can go back and take a particular take that in the old days when you were using Ampex tapes, you would have to go back and reel it back,
Right.
to find a particular take. Today, you just have it in front of you. You press a button, and there it is. The different time.
The music, like I always say to myself, where has the great music gone? I listen to music today, and I sound like an old man. I'm only 50, but I don't understand the music coming out today.
It's a different approach. It has a lot to do with the show business that seems to be intertwined with the material that they're using. For instance, you take a person like Kanye West, and he's got a new way of appearing now, with this hovering stage and all that. Isn't that right? That's what he's doing. And a lot of it is sound side. It may have started back in the 70s, possibly. We have new equipment now, and of course the whole approach to music today is much different. But I'll say this. In my history of commercial music class, it's very interesting that the students, who were all born probably around 1994, 1995, they had this curiosity about music that was recorded back in the 60s, especially the Beatles.
Yes.
And they all know what the Sgt. Pepper album is, and all these things. It's a very interesting thing.
Bill Pursell, our special guest. Bill, I want to say thank you for enlightening us and educating us on music and giving us a little look inside your world. And I want to say, the best to you in this holiday season. And thank you. Thanks for your time.
Oh, the same to you, Ray. Thanks for having me on your show.
I would love to have you on again, and I just wish you the best and take care.
Oh, you too. Take care. Bye-bye.